Welcome to the Hall of Horrors. To Stereo 3D Productions. Right. As you may see, we're about to embark on a game-specific guide for a title that I've been playing on my channel for a while and have already done a few makeshift VorpX tutorials on. Bioshock Infinite. Before we rush to talking about the game, there's a few things you need to know on how these guides work. This video is part of a series of VorpX tutorials that begins with the VorpX Universal Guide. I highly recommend watching the Universal Guide before getting to this video or any other game-specific video in the series. The Universal Guide is the foundation of the series and thus covers a lot of general elements that I won't directly address here. If you haven't watched it yet, look for a link to the Universal Guide at the top of the description of this video. This series is also open for updates. Should you see the tag outdated between brackets in the title of this video, look for a link to a newer, updated version of this tutorial in the description. Now, Bioshock Infinite. She who used to be an enigma and has now become one of the best VorpX adaptations to date. This game has an interesting story on this channel. First off, it's one of two games that I had finished end-to-end before the dawn of good VR injection, and later restarted from the beginning using VorpX. Secondly, it's a game that I had attempted to create a Let's Play series for about a year ago, only to notice that the consistency of the mouse movement in this game made configuring good head tracking absolutely impossible. For the most part, you'd end up with good results, but the second you'd enter combat, where your head gestures naturally become more swift, the tracking rate was so erratic you'd end up with your head pointed up and your in-game view looking straight down in about 5 seconds. Fast forward to New Year's 2017 where VorpX introduced DirectVR. It was bittersweet. Configure the game, run the DirectVR scan, oh look, it seems like it's working, get the raffle square and experience a game-breaking glitch. At the time, the game would seriously go bonkers and require complex shenanigans in order to progress past the raffle. Minutes later, mid-combat, the game systematically crashes. Well, not systematically, but at any given point in the battle following raffle square, it would crash. Finally, we get to the latest VorpX updates, which had announced improved DirectVR reliability. I braved back into Colombia and tried getting past Raffle Square. While I was initially afraid it would be the same shitty result, as the Raffle Square draw glitched again, this time I got around it easily, just toggling DirectVR off and back on. Furthermore, I passed the first combat section with ease, no crashing. After a few tests, hoping to be able to continue this masterpiece of a game, I finally found the proper configuration to avoid some lingering mouse focus issues, which were resulting in my mouse pointer flying out of the game window and accidentally clicking on the desktop or other programs, causing the game's pause menu to come up. I fixed everything. I managed to start playing regularly again without any major issues past Raffle Square. Really, I wonder why that one glitch is still there, because the rest of the game is easily mistakable for an actual built-for-VR experience, I kid you not. Let's get on with configuration. I'll make sure to give you all you need to avoid hitting any walls. The issues are now super easy to deal with, and they're fortunately few and very far apart. As usual, if you plan on playing any game in VR, you have to run it at least once normally, without VorpX or your runtimes running, so it can finish up its installation and write configuration files. During this run, I normally take the time to go in the graphics options and prepare my game for VR. Typically, VorpX games will prefer being run at 4:3 resolutions rather than the more common 16:9 aspect ratio. In this case, however, Bioshock Infinite is an exception. Set your display mode to windowed full screen, which should then have the resolution match your monitors along with the aspect ratio. Using this mode will prevent the game from trying to sync to your monitor's refresh rate and thus, if your system is capable, the game will be able to unleash the frame rate fury. The windowed full screen mode will also prevent another issue regarding the mouse flying out of the game's window, and I'll go on about that issue later in the video. As you may have noticed, we don't have our usual choice of resolution, but don't worry. Loading this game in VR at 1920 by 1080 should run well even on a 1060, and I recall it being quite decent on my 970 back when I tested the game before DirectVR was added to VorpX. What's even better here is the game looks great with this configuration, one of the smoothest I've seen in my headset to date. Provided you tune the graphics options reasonably, this should run on anything that's up to spec for VR. Feel free to fine-tune the graphics whichever way you want. I covered a lot on what graphics options do in the Universal Guide, so for this game, I'll only highlight a few unique things. First, unlike most games, Bioshock Infinite looks best in VR with high-quality post-processing, depth of field, and even screen space ambient occlusion, as in this case, those effects contribute to the game's fantastic dream factor, and the depth of field is gentle enough that you won't get a smeared vision. This game's FOV slider should not be touched. If you've previously changed your FOV in this game, make sure to return it to the default setting, which is the very middle of the slider. If you don't do this, the field of view resulting from the DirectVR scan will be incorrect. Last, if for some reason lock frame rate is enabled, make sure to turn it off. Go ahead and save your graphics settings and quit the game. We're going to use the VorpX settings optimizer to simply kill off the game's nasty mouse smoothing without even having to open any configuration files. In the optimizer, pick the Bioshock Infinite profile. Make sure to uncheck the field of view modifier, as that will mess up our DirectVR scan later. Leave latency optimization checked, click Optimize Settings, and voila! You can now close the VorpX configuration tool. Now, it's time to get to our amazing main feature, which works off a DirectVR configuration, one of the simplest approaches we have. Before you get everything running, make sure to disable multiple displays. This game has an issue with the mouse literally bailing on the game, causing the pause menu to come up. Running the game in windowed full screen without multiple displays will prevent this issue. Fire up VorpX and your runtimes and start Bioshock Infinite. Start a brand new game and let the intro sequence finish entirely. It's a bummer that we can't enjoy this part with a proper config, but it's not a big deal. Once you get to the docks, let the two assholes row away and stand somewhere in the middle of the dock. If you go inside the shed or up the stairs before doing the next step, it's possible the DirectVR scan may fail, as it doesn't seem to like the players standing near walls or railings. Once you're in the open, in the middle of the dock, press the delete key to bring up the VorpX HUD. First thing you want to make sure of is that 3D reconstruction is set to Geometry 3D. Adjust your separation strength to 0.7 for the most realistic impression of world scale. We don't need to use FOV boost here, so leave that at 0. I'll note that this game does work well with 3D reconstruction on Z normal, but I don't recommend using this unless you're running under spec. If you want to try it, with 3D reconstruction on Z normal, set the strength to 1.6, surprisingly this one doesn't need it full blast, and drop the depth weighing to absolute minimum. While some effects and all shadows will render correctly with this feature, atmospheric effects like fog, light shafts, and particles will not have any 3D depth, and the artificial reconstruction will cause tons of shimmer in the image. If you have means of watching this video in stereoscopic 3D, you can see both modes compared here. While Z normal works, Geometry 3D is clearly more believable and looks smoother. Under image settings, feel free to toggle crystal image between normal and off depending on preference. It's also possible that off will give you a little performance boost. Set G3D shadow treatment to turn off. Optionally, when you enter Monument Tower, I do recommend switching that setting to auto, as to my great surprise, the most impressive dynamic light effects work well in that section of the game, and they're really cool to have. For the most part, keeping G3D shadow treatment on turn off will prevent a few unnecessary eyesores while not affecting the game's appearance too much. Normally we tweak image zoom, but this time leave it at 1, we don't need to touch this. Last, under display settings, make sure that direct mode fluid sync is set to off if it isn't. This feature will limit your frame rate at 45 frames per second, and with a game that runs this well, this should not be necessary in almost all cases. Do experiment with it if you're running under spec, like on a 960 or less. Next, go to the DirectVR section and select the option to run a scan. DirectVR will attempt 3 scans: rotation, position, and field of view. While I've seen a few fluke fails, and while standing near walls may well cause some aspects to fail, I've normally been able to get around the flukes by retrying the scan. For the most part, it's worked the first time around. If you find that your field of view is completely off, then you are not running the game with the default field of view, which is the very middle setting on the slider. My positional tracking has been off for most of my playthrough, but feel free to turn it on if you want that. As far as I'm aware, the feature works well. Keep in mind that every time you reload your game, you'll have to run another DirectVR scan. I was hoping to see the cache working for this game, but no, you have to rescan once for each session. Because of circumstances, you probably won't always get to scan from the very beginning, so as a rule of thumb, keep in mind that for best results, you should never run your DirectVR scan during cutscenes, especially not those that cause the game's field of view to go in letterbox mode. Always do these scans somewhere where you're free to move, preferably in the open. That's it. At this point, you're ready to play one of the best looking implementations of third-party VR I've seen to date. Do stick around for the list of known issues, as the majority of them lie in the first sections of the game, so you're bound to discover them the hard way, yet they're so easy to deal with and definitely won't affect the main objective, which is playing Bioshock Infinite in VR. This game is really incredible with VorpX, but you'll need to know about a few issues so your play isn't halted for nothing. The first issue is the mouse confinement problem. If you run the game in windowed mode at a resolution with an aspect ratio different from your primary monitors, your game will be susceptible to loss of mouse focus. That's right, the pointer flies right out of the game, and the next time you click, you find it's clicked on your desktop or another program you have open, and this causes the game to bring up the pause menu mid-play. This is likely the single most frustrating thing that can happen, and running the game in windowed full screen and disabling multiple displays resolves this issue completely. What's shocking is this issue appears to happen with the game even without VR. The next issue is one you'll encounter early. I like to call it the scenic FOV stretch. Some areas or hotspots in the game will cause the player's view to go into a scenic letterbox mode, which causes the field of view to tighten and the head tracking to lock. Such hotspots are numerous in the lighthouse at the beginning, near some tables, but especially near walls and railings. Don't let this issue discourage you. First off, it's easy to get rid of when it happens, just turn away from it with your mouse. And second, while the lighthouse is sort of plastered in such hotspots, the further you get in the game, the more rare this issue becomes. After the Comstock Rooftops section, I actually had a hard time finding locations to record examples of the issue. It's annoying, but it doesn't affect any of the gameplay. To keep things in sequence, the next issue you'll encounter is the damn water in the first part of the Welcome Center. I don't know, man, as messed up as the water reflections are in that section of the game, to my huge surprise and pleasure, it looks like it's the only spot in the game with the problem. So brave through, as you probably won't see anything of the sort again. I've played up to the Hall of Heroes and have yet to see a similar issue since. This next one is really important because it almost fooled me into interrupting my play. When you get to Raffle Square and the time comes to throw the ball, the prompt won't come up and your E and Q keys won't do anything. To work around this, and this was way easier than I thought it would be, just temporarily turn DirectVR off in the VorpX HUD, make your choice in the game, then toggle DirectVR back on. You won't even need to rescan. This issue baffles me since guess what? That's right, like the water thing, I haven't seen a glitch like this since. Raffle Square's refusal to cooperate seems to be unique to that sequence, so once you're past it, you can forget about it. Last, the game likes to tell you to press F to look at stuff. Don't. You know what that does? It does the same shit as the scenic FOV stretch issue. Locks your head tracking, steers your look direction, and tightens your field of view. Given visibility in VR is excellent, and that detail is much easier to notice, you'll probably always see what they want you to look at before the prompt even comes up. I'll toss in a little extra. It's actually pretty important. Do not use aim down sights unless you absolutely have to. Obviously, aim down sights is never something that adapts well for VR in a retrofit injection, as it shifts your field of view and feels highly uncomfortable. This game has such good hand models, bullet tracers, and a crosshair, all means that make the whole thing playable by firing from the hip. It's only those goddamn snipers that require some scoping. Bioshock Infinite is the second game that I had previously played and finished before the dawn of good VR injection. It's a game that had captivated me with its story, but that proved to be frustrating on combat given the game's built-in mouse smoothing, which can only be disabled in part, made for a difficult time playing with a mouse, a problem that baffles me for a first-person shooter. VorpX and DirectVR not only make playing this game in virtual reality possible, but given the head tracking provides such a reliable aim, coupled with the convenience of very smooth mouse yaw, it completely changes the nature of combat. Given the movement is so fluid, and that the game runs so well on current-gen GPUs, the combat becomes an exciting back and forth between run and gun and cover and shoot, rather than a constant battle with the mouse as it was for me playing on screen. A lot of work was put into the enemy behavior in this game, and I feel like I didn't get to appreciate it as much the first time I finished the game on screen using stereoscopic 3D. In this game, VR gives you a dimension of freedom that I really never felt at my first playthrough. It's still highly challenging, but you feel so much more in control, it really changes the feel of this game for the very, very much better. I've gone as far as saying I don't recognize the game since I started playing it with VorpX, and by this, I mean that the thing runs almost exactly like a real-seated virtual reality game. I've seen way more bugs in first-party VR than I have in this retrofit implementation. This is by all means a whole new VR game to me now. The thing is incredible and should really be experienced by everyone who owns a VR headset today. Would I recommend this to a VR noob? Well, it's still a first-person shooter with keyboard and mouse yaw, but given the implementation of VR is so excellent in this case, I would give beginners a go-ahead provided they're careful and play at a very leisurely pace. Don't rush, don't get killed every 5 seconds as the crossing from scene to scene over and over again may be annoying and jarring in VR. Explore, take your time during the intro before Raffle Square, drink it all in. Look for that detail you never noticed on screen. Search for secrets, loot the town. Nobody is in a rush. For intermediate to advanced VR users, go right ahead if you haven't already. This is 100% virtual reality gold, coated in platinum with diamond flakes. If you want to follow me through my experience with this game, there's a Let's Play series on my channel. I'll provide a link to that in the description. I've developed a scoring system for a VorpX-powered game based on 9 criteria which come together to form what we'll be calling a vScore. 8 criteria provide points, and 1 is a penalty value. The criteria are: first, the fixed points values, where a game is given all or nothing for each criteria. Acceptable 3D method, this is worth 30 points. If we can't have depth perception, we cannot have VR. Bioshock Infinite qualifies for the 30 points. Proper geometry 3D. Geometry 3D brings a game to life by providing the only authentic stereoscopic 3D method, so 15 points for that. Columbia can be relived with geometry, so no problem here, 15 points. Proper head tracking. Head tracking that goes all over the place is not fun, so this is worth 15 points. Since DirectVR fixed the fact that this game's mouse smoothing completely ruined any chance of good head tracking, Bioshock Infinite now nails this criteria perfectly. Second, the variable criteria, where the amount of points can be adjusted for each item. Sufficient field of view. A game really needs some means for forcing the field of view, and because of the various ways we can achieve this, some more effective, some less, this is worth up to 15 points. Pretty straightforward, especially with DirectVR, 15 points. Proper 3D hand models and weapons. This has over time become a nice to have for third-party VR, as it's quite rare, but gets a game up to 5 points for getting it right. Seriously, the hand models in Bioshock Infinite are so good, it's only normal to wonder if they ever intended on developing it for VR. 5 points. Proper shadows graphics. Good shadows are hard to come by in VR, especially dynamic ones, so a game can gain up to 5 points on those. Since we have to turn a tiny number of things off with the G3D shadow treatment, the game gets 4 out of 5 here. Otherwise, I didn't encounter much problems, put aside the known issue with the water in the welcome center. Proper user interface and heads-up display. Being able to see your health, ammo count, and such is a plus, isn't it? Up to 5 points for how a game handles a heads-up display. This is probably today's game's weakest point, and it's still not a big problem. Some numbers might be hard to read, but you can generally see your stats well, and the HUD responds to the VorpX UI scaling feature. 3 points for this criteria. DirectVR bonus. DirectVR makes the process of setting up a game much easier and often delivers perfect head tracking. Based on how a game supports it, it can get up to 10 points in bonus. Bioshock Infinite is one of the easier setups in the line, given aside for needing to be aware of a few known issues, it's virtually a plug-and-play scenario. It easily earns the whole bonus. Last but not least, the penalty criteria. The penalty exists to offset a game's score due to glitches or major issues. Up to 10 points can be withdrawn. The field of view stretching and glitches like the raffle square bug may not be frequent, but they're annoying, and if you don't know the workaround, you might be misled to think it's all over. It's not all over, but it's annoying, and it blemishes this game's otherwise nearly perfect record. I'm applying 2 penalty points to Bioshock Infinite for these minor but annoying glitches. Bioshock Infinite yields a vScore of 95, which is an impressive score and represents the near plug-and-play nature of the setup very well. Like I said, it's at most times easy to mistake it for an actual virtual reality game. I've always wanted to see VR injection work this well, and here we are. This one is for real. I hope you get on your way being amazed by the twisted, mentally unstable beauty that is Columbia. It's quite a voyage, and in no time it'll make you forget you're using VR at all, really letting you escape into one of the most amazing and shocking virtual reality worlds I've ever explored. Thanks for watching the guide. If you want more VorpX tutorial type videos, there's a playlist on my channel that will list all the game-specific guides along with a very important VorpX Universal Guide, which offers information that ties into all these game-specific videos. Until the next tutorial or the next video, I'll see you next time.